Future Redeemed is the final part of the Xenoblade Chronicles 3 expansion pack. But don't let that fool you. Just like Xenoblade Chronicle 2's story expansion, Torn of the Golden Country, this is a full standalone game that will run you upwards of 20 hours just to see the main story play out. Gameplay-wise, what's on offer here is quite similar to the base game. A large party size, a nearly identical battle system, and everything set in the same world, Ionios. Our first boss is even a Mobius console, complete with Shulk and Rex cutting flame clocks in a weight-of-life cutscene. The biggest difference between Future Redeemed and base game Xenoblade 3 is now we have a static party and character classes that are not interchangeable. Instead, each of the 6 party characters sticks to a specific role. Matthew will always be an attacker, Nicole will always be a tank, and Glimmer will always be a healer. Classes will always remain the same, but character customization still remains critically important to success in combat. Gems and accessories work in pretty much the same way as the base game, except now gems having a max level of 5, and there's a third accessory slot on each character for manuals. These are items which add an additional interchangeable effect utilized during chain attacks. In the base game, the effect of your chain attack would vary greatly based on who you used as the active hero, but since hero characters do not exist in Future Redeemed, manuals help add more variety to chain attacks, which are fundamentally less interesting with a static party. Additional slots for gems, accessories, and even arts are this time not unlocked by leveling up your characters. Instead, more slots become available if you manage to find certain items called unlock kits scattered around the world. I have a love-hate relationship with this, especially with how it relates to one of Future Redeemed's new additions, Affinity Points. On one hand, I really like Affinity Points because they incentivize you to fight a lot of normal enemy mobs, something that can lose value very quickly in many other RPGs. The way you have to collect certain items or defeat X amount of enemies reminds me of the Blade Affinity charts in Xenoblade 2, a system I really loved. But the way it's executed in Future Redeemed, at least during my first playthrough, annoyed me a bit. This might be my own fault though. Super excited for lore revelations and to see how this saga would end, I wanted to move fast through the story, and then come back later to complete side quests and explore more thoroughly. Because of this decision, unlock kits became the bane of my existence. There were times when I racked up 200 or 300 affinity points with no way to spend them, since I hadn't found any unlock kits. I wasn't taking as much time exploring and doing quests, and was pretty much main pathing the story. I realized playing this way is probably not what the developers intended, since unlock kits, by their very nature, reward the player for exploring and doing side content. Incentivizing exploration of the big, breathtaking maps is something Xenoblade has always done particularly well, and the unlock kits are just another smart way Monolith has done just that. So in that way, I respect it. I do think at the end of the day, it is a great system if you're taking your time, as you probably should be in a vast, highly detailed game like this. That being said, I didn't struggle too much with my characters feeling underpowered, and it didn't really detract from my experience in any serious way. With a smart character loadout and use of my bonus EXP, I didn't really need to grind. There were a few tough stretches, like the Niall boss fight or this Sea of Ignas in the Black Mountains, but in every case, simply adjusting my gem or accessory loadout could mostly take care of business. I did lose to N pretty solidly the first time around, but once I went back to do the side quest to unlock higher level gems, I was able to take him on no problem. Something new to Future Redeemed are weapon upgrades done by Riku in his Colony 9 laboratory. I'm not sure how much this whole system was needed, as it's basically just spending money to give your characters higher stats. Maybe it was meant to be a nod to the traditional weapon and armor equips in Xenoblade 1. But hey, at the very least, it was another excuse to interact with Riku, which is something I'd never complain about. As I mentioned at the top, combat is of course very similar to base game Xenoblade 3, yet things feel pretty fresh due to having 6 brand new characters to play with. Matthew, fitting for his personality, is an up-close and personal bruiser who uses a variety of punching attacks, making him a close comp to his future kin Gondor in her class in base game. Matthew has a lot of very strong arts and skills that help him to deal massive damage. Several of his skills on the affinity chart revolve around canceling arts, which makes combat with him very satisfying. A is one of the party's 2 main healers, and since she is Alvis's conscience, fittingly serves as a stoic voice of reason in the group. Since she is one part of the Ontos core, she is a very strong character as well, having a pretty broken Monado Vision talent art that will make the entire party invincible for longer than it probably should. Being a pretty big fan of the character design and kit, it's not surprising I found myself using A most out of any character during the adventure. Nicole is a tank from Kevis, and Glimmer is a healer from Agnes. I didn't find these two quite as interesting to play as, but still they served their roles very well. Nicole soaked up aggro for most of my playthrough, while Glimmer's attack up buff was vital along with her ability to revive fallen party members. And then of course there are the final two, Shulk and Rex. I'm gonna say straight out that Shulk never felt right to me as a defender class. At least in my runs of Xenoblade 1, he was always a great damage dealer who you didn't really want having aggro, so the whole role reversal here was kinda strange. As Shulk's matured, he's clearly taken after Dunban, and the switch in battle styles is a great example of that. Again, nothing wrong with the character itself, but it just felt kinda weird. Rex on the other hand feels just right, with his character design focusing mainly on landing critical hits. I felt Rex, along with Matthew, was probably the most fun to play as during actual combat. And since I'm a massive fan of this character and the entirety of Xenoblade 2, I couldn't be happier. Although I did invest in Matthew more during the main story, which made me use him to rip through most of the fights, I've recently put some investment in a Rex build that's helping me tear through the post-game, and I'm having a blast. Another really fun change to combat in Future Redeemed are the Unity combos. I mean, I love the idea right away. Characters pair up for a combo attack, and each pair has a different special move. But as I thought about it more, I wondered if these attacks would be much more than a glorified talent art. What I found to be really great about them is how each inflicts either burst, smash, or blowdown, turning them into satisfying combo enders. Every time an enemy was put into launch state, Unity combos provided a satisfying way to complete the combo in cinematic fashion, one-upping a traditional burst or smash skill in the base game. It became my routine to prepare Shulk and Rex for a satisfying high damage smash, or Nicole and Glimmer to burst a unique monster after I got it enraged. While I think it's hard to say right now if Future Redeemed's changes are an improvement to Xenoblade 3's combat system, I don't think any new changes make the combat lesser than what's offered in the base game. And despite losing the ability to interlink, I didn't really find myself missing it much. For me right now, I'd say combat in Future Redeemed is different, but it can match the highs from base game, which is in itself pretty high praise. In terms of story, I loved base Xenoblade 3's a lot, but I did feel it ended too quickly, which I know is kinda ridiculous to say about a 60+ hour game. Maybe I'd feel differently on a replay, but I personally felt that everything after Kevis Castle moved a little too fast for my liking. But despite my pacing problems, Future Redeemed gave me the exact kind of story extension I was looking for, polishing off the story told by Xenoblade 3 while also tying it back to Xeno at large in many ways, a lot of which I could have truly never expected. I like how a lot of the Xeno fan service was segmented off into affinity scenes, making it amazing for those who care about the story and still worth it for everyone else, since these award AP to the player just for watching. There were some amazing moments, like exploring the remnants of Dunban's house in Colony 9, learning about Riku's master pawn and family lineage, in that affinity scene that's located in the same spot of Outlook Park as the first heart-to-heart of Xenoblade 1. I mean, come on. Just like in the base game's Ionios, there are also many secret areas that are fascinating, emotional references to both Xenoblade 1 and 2, and I felt myself welling up while exploring these in more than one occasion. This is that kind of care and craft from Nintendo and Monolith Soft that's simply unmatched, in my humble opinion. Speaking of Xenoblade 1, I felt this DLC to be very Xenoblade 1 focused. I don't mean this in any sort of negative way, it's just something I noticed. The new areas in Future Redeemed were mostly Xenoblade 1 references. Of course, there's Colony 9 and the surrounding area, the Black Mountains, which are honestly more Valak Mountain than they are Tantal, and of course, Prison Island, complete with that iconic trek up towards it. Admittedly, I am a sucker for nostalgia, but I was completely in awe for the entire Prison Island sequence. It truly felt like coming home, and you know I had to switch to Shulk for it. But again, Future Redeemed isn't just a fanservice fest. It is a fantastic standalone story centered around Matthew and Niall Vandam from the original city. And despite being a new character, Matthew won me over from the word go, due in no small part to a fantastic voice performance. And while we didn't see that much of Niall herself, it was easy to see how much she meant to Matthew, and her disgust for violence in the way of Mobius's world made her the perfect vessel for Alpha in its intended reset. Speaking of, Future Redeemed provides a satisfying answer to what happened with Ontos post Xenoblade 1 and 2. With Tetsuya Takahashi proclaiming this DLC the end of the Cloud Saga, you knew there was going to be some Trinity processor stuff here. Future Redeemed brings all three cores together in truly epic fashion. While I had noticed the green glow from Noah's blade before, and of course the Ouroboros stone and then Matthew's gauntlets, I just chalked it up to some kind of special ether flow, and never expected it to be Numa. And at the same time, it's implied that the memory of Logos was preserved through Origin, which allows it to flow through the Sword of the End. So besides actual cameos from the presumably dead Pyra, Mithra, and Malos, we got, in my opinion, just about everything we could have possibly wanted to end the Klaus saga. Alvis, Shulk, and Rex, all three sporting a new look, served as excellent guides for Matthew and the two children. It was fun to observe Nickel and Glimmer's polar opposite personalities, and the way each takes after their respective father. It all leads to a great scene of Shulk and Rex bonding over fatherhood. I loved seeing grown-up versions of these two previous protagonists, and the mutual sense of respect between them really warmed my heart. They never tell their kids who exactly they are, but I think by the end it's understood. Whether that's through a natural understanding or by viewing memories from Origin, that's up to our interpretation. And speaking of up to interpretation, can we talk about that ending? Let's just say the possibility of X coming to Switch next, or even getting an X2, has never been more likely. I can't really speak to the Cosmos theory since I haven't played Xenosaga yet, but wow, that combined with the radio mentioning Project Exodus, I mean, these could just be references, but could it possibly be hinting at an X project coming next? Who knows? I mean, Takahashi did mention players who finish Future Redeemed will have a good idea about what's next for the series, and that's certainly one interpretation. I do like that there wasn't any sort of epilogue bit to Xenoblade 3 included here. I've always felt that the ending of Xenoblade 3 is perfect as is, and that story does not need to continue. The final scene confirming the successful merging of the two worlds was just the right amount of closure I needed, especially after seeing what more went into it during Future Redeemed. The amount of deep analysis we could do on certain themes, references, and interpretation of events from Future Redeemed alone is mind-blowing, and I can't wait for the deeper analysis videos to start coming out. But for me now, it's all about the post-game content, finishing up side quests, completing the map, and maxing out affinity points. And of course, there's plenty of super bosses to fight. Plus, I can do this all with Niall as my 7th party member. It's actually pretty disappointing she's not a full-on character with an affinity tree. She's actually just an uncontrollable AI with the same effect in chain attacks as Matthew, but even still, it's cool to have the extra help in fights. As for my verdict on Future Redeemed, it's incredible. It makes an already great modern classic RPG even better. And as far as DLC goes, it's right up there with Torn of the Golden Country as one of the best updates in the history of video games. As the end credits rolled, it broke me. I couldn't be more thankful for this series, and the Cloud Saga in particular. Closing this story arc, one that spans multiple games and decades, was always going to be a tough job. And if I'm being honest, I actually feel that this is a satisfying ending. I didn't want all my questions answered, and they weren't. So there's still enough to ponder during the presumed upcoming drought of Xeno content. And no matter what comes next, an X project, Xenoblade 4, or an all-new Xeno game, I'll be here waiting, all 10 terms if I have to.